This is another video in my NIV Bible reading series. In this video, I will be reading through Exodus 11. Not Exodus, Leviticus 11. And this is going to be talking about the Old Testament laws of clean and unclean food. Yeah. Let's just get into it. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Say to the Israelites, of all the animals that live on land, these are the ones you may eat. You may eat any animal that has a split hoof completely divided and that chews the cud. There are some that only chew the cud or only have a split hoof, but you must not eat them. The camel, though it chews the cud, does not have a split hoof. It is ceremonially unclean for you. The coney, which I guess it says, there's a note here, it says the hyrax or rock badger, though it chews the cud, does not have a split hoof. It is unclean for you. The rabbit, though it chews the cud, does not have a split hoof. It is unclean for you. And the pig, though it has a split hoof completely divided, does not chew the cud. It is unclean for you. You must not eat their meat or touch their carcasses. They are unclean for you. Of all the creatures living in the water of the seas and the streams, you may eat any that have fins and scales. But all creatures in the seas or streams that do not have fins and scales, whether among all the swarming things or among all the other living creatures in the water, you are to detest. And since you are to detest them, you must not eat their meat, and you must detest their carcasses. Anything living in the water that does not have fins and scales is to be detestable to you. These are the birds you are to detest and not eat, because they are detestable: the eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the red kite, any kind of black kite, any kind of raven, the horned owl, the screech owl, the gull, any kind of hawk, the little owl, the cormorant, the great owl, the white owl, the desert owl, the osprey, the stork, any kind of heron, the hoopoi, and the bat. All flying insects that walk on all fours are to be detestable to you. There are, however, some winged creatures that walk on all fours that you may eat, those that have jointed legs for hopping on the ground. Of these you may eat any kind of locust, katydid, cricket, or grasshopper. But all other winged creatures that have 4 legs you are to detest. You will make yourselves unclean by these. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean till evening. Whoever picks up one of their carcasses must wash his clothes, and he will be unclean till evening. Every animal that has a split hoof, not completely divided, or that does not chew the cud is unclean for you. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them will be unclean. Of all the animals that walk on all fours, those that walk on their paws are unclean for you. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean till evening. Anyone who picks up their carcasses must wash his clothes, and he will be unclean till evening. They are unclean for you. Of the animals that move about on the ground, these are unclean for you: the weasel, the rat, any kind of great lizard, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the wall lizard, the skink, and the chameleon. Of all those that move along the ground, these are unclean for you. Whoever touches them when they are dead will be unclean till evening. When one of them dies and falls on something, the article, whatever its use, will be unclean. Whether it is made of wood, cloth, hide, or sackcloth, put it in water. It will be unclean till evening, and then it will be clean. If one of them falls into a clay pot, everything in it will be unclean, and you must break the pot. Any food that could be eaten but has water on it from such a pot is unclean, and any liquid that could be drunk from it is unclean. Anything that one of their carcasses falls on becomes unclean. An oven or cooking pot must be broken up. They are unclean, and you are to regard them as unclean. A spring, however, or a cistern for collecting water remains clean, but anyone who touches one of these carcasses is unclean. If a carcass falls on any seeds that are to be planted, they remain clean. But if water has been put on the seed and a carcass falls on it, it is unclean for you. If an animal that you are allowed to eat dies, anyone who touches the carcass will be unclean till evening. Anyone who eats some of the carcass must wash his clothes, and he will be unclean till evening. Anyone who picks up the carcass must wash his clothes, and he will be unclean till evening. Every creature that moves about on the ground is detestable. It is not to be eaten. You are not to eat any creature that moves about on the ground, whether it moves on his belly or walks on all fours or on many feet. It is detestable. Do not defile yourselves by any of these creatures. Do not make yourselves unclean by means of them, or be made unclean by them. I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am holy. Do not make yourselves unclean by any creature that moves about on the ground. I am the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt to be your God. Therefore be holy, because I am holy. These are the regulations concerning animals, birds, every living thing that moves in the water, and every creature that moves about on the ground. You must distinguish between the unclean and the clean, between living creatures that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. All right. Yeah, so now in the new, I'm putting the disclaimer at the end here. So you have New Testament times and you have Old Testament times. So in the Old Testament, there were a ton of these ceremonial laws. That there was the ceremonial law, which involves the tabernacle and all that other stuff. The ceremonial and civil laws, which do not apply in the New Testament times. And the New Testament times is during the time of Christ. In the New Testament, you start with the Gospels and all that stuff. Before that, I think that it's called the Mosaic Covenant, and stuff like that. These are law. You had the moral law, the civil law, and the ceremonial law. The ceremonial law is what we're talking about. Is the tabernacle, the burnt offerings every day that went on every day, a lot, a good portion of the day, and stuff like that, like the sin offering, guilt offering, all that stuff. And then you had stuff like the clean and unclean food thing, where it's like, but you don't have those laws in the New Testament times. Those laws were for a specific people, the Israelites, during those times in the Old Testament. So in the New Testament, we have the New Covenant, and Jesus Christ came, which is 100% man, but is also God. Basically, the Son of Man came. Jesus Christ sacrificed himself. He was the only sacrifice that was good enough for this. Was good enough for our sins, to atone for sin, because in the Old Testament times, when you burnt all these burnt offerings, it was a constant reminder of the sin of man, and and Jesus Christ was sacrifice one sacrifice. Jesus Christ. You don't have to Jesus Christ isn't a sacrifice that it has to be repeated and repeated. He sacrificed himself. That was to atone for our sin, for the sin of man. The dang wash are really killing me right now. But anyway, Jesus Christ, because he was perfect. He was and is perfect. So he was the second Adam. So he only sacrifice a perfect sacrifice like that. Perfect sacrifice like that is good enough to atone for man's sin. So you don't have to do the tabernacle anymore. You don't have the tabernacle because Jesus Christ is the mediator, as opposed to back then the mediator was through the tabernacle, and God came down. God would go into the tabernacle and speak to like Moses, and then Moses would relay it to the people and stuff. But now anyone could just talk to God, through Christ, because the mediator, and stuff like that, and stuff. And so we don't have the basically we don't have the ceremonial law anymore. We are not under the laws such as well. Like you don't have to like follow this like clean and unclean food laws. As far as I know, I'm early in my Christian walk. I'm definitely 100% sure on the whole tabernacle and all that stuff, because it wouldn't make sense if we were still doing tabernacles and burnt offerings and all that stuff. So the ceremonial law is definitely overridden. Was overridden in the new covenant with Jesus. Those laws were for the Israelites and stuff, so that it's thought that God had those rules, those extra rules and all that stuff for the Israelites and the people of the Old Testament, that because he wanted those people, his chosen people, to be distinct from all the other peoples in the surrounding lands, like the pagans and all that other, and all those other stuff that had like the Asherah poles and like supported other gods, false gods and deities and stuff like that. So yeah, that's what it's thought. It doesn't, as far as I know, it doesn't say directly in the scriptures that God did it because of this, but it makes sense. God had these rules and stuff for the Israelites set up so that people like the people would be distinct from the rest of the people in the land, and also to remind with the burnt offerings to remind them of their sin, of their sin, and that those burnt offerings weren't enough to weren't like a good enough sacrifice to where you sacrifice and then you're done. God wanted them to have a constant reminder that of the sin of man. But then Jesus came and was the perfect sacrifice. Sacrifice. So we don't. So it's different. It's different. We are. Yeah. So it's not. But it's still the Bible. It's in our Bible as Christians, because you can't have a New Testament without the Old Testament. The Old Testament, you had that, and then progression in time, and stuff like that. Even in the Old Testament, you have through the prophets a prediction. Basically you got the prophecies and stuff in the Old Testament. Alludes to a coming. It's like there is a man that's going to come and stuff like that, and he'll be perfect and atone for our sins and all that other stuff. So Jesus Christ's coming is foretold in the Old Testament. As far as I know, they're like not just like once, but there's like many times. As I'll come across them as I read through and stuff like that. Through this series, and I'll comment on it. And but yeah, if you have anything to say in the comments, if you need if you have any questions and stuff like that, you're in and stuff like that, we can work out together. If you just want to start a conversation, and stuff like that, just let me know and stuff. And if I see your comment, I will definitely engage with you. But anyway, that's it. I'm gonna head out.